Here we go gathering nuts in May, nuts in May, nuts in May. Here we go gathering nuts in May on a cold and frosty morning.
In February 2020, audiences were treated to Lee Wannell's Invisible Man. You might know Wannell as the director of the cyberpunk movie Upgrade, but most likely you know him as Adam.
Rise and shine, Adam.
But he's not just Adam. He's the co-writer of Saw, and he's good friends with the director James Wan. The writer-director team went on to make several of the Insidious films together, the third of which Wannell actually directed. By 2018, they'd split so they could focus on their own projects, namely Upgrade and Aquaman, but the two stayed in close touch. When Wan was working on Aquaman, Wannell reached out to him to ask what interested him in the character. Wan replied, "People think of Aquaman as a joke, and this is a perfect opportunity for me to wipe that away." Not long after, when Universal approached Wannell to write The Invisible Man, he saw an opportunity of his own to reinvent a character and remind audiences why The Invisible Man can be such a terrifying thing. The Invisible Man is a character that's been around for over 100 years now, but Hollywood can't seem to get enough of the concept. In the last 90 years, there's been at least 25 different takes on the character from all across the world. There were adaptations in Mexico, Russia, Japan, and Vietnam. But at its core, each Invisible Man movie is about a man becoming invisible and getting hunted down by the people he torments with his new power. It's a pretty basic story, but to find out why it's been retold so many times, you have to take a look at the original film. In it, you see every element that was expressed in the films that followed. Spin the clock back nearly 100 years to 1933, when James Whale's movie monster classic was first released. It starred Claude Rains and Gloria Stewart, who you've probably seen in one of James Cameron's more successful films.
It's been 84 years.
In that film, the chemist Jack Griffin is driven mad with power after only a few days when one of his experiments renders him invisible. At first, he sought the seclusion of a quiet inn so he could research a way to reverse the effects of the serum, but he proves to be too interesting for the other patrons and they couldn't leave him alone. He just needs a few days to find an antidote to the serum, but the constant interruptions and peering eyes cause him to snap. Griffin soon realized that invisibility gave him the chance to live outside the rules of society, and when society had no power over him, he aimed to control it.
Suddenly I realized the power I held. The power to rule, to make the world grovel at my feet.
This is a running theme through every adaptation of H.G. Wells' novel. Give a man invisibility and he becomes a monster. In the original,
A little of this injected under the skin of the arm every day for a month. An invisible man can rule the world. Nobody will see him come, nobody will see him go. He can hear every secret. He can rob, rape, and kill.
7 years later, in The Invisible Man Returns,
I don't want friends. I shall have worshippers and followers, people who will obey me because they recognize my greatness.
and 70 years after that, a contemporary take on the original story with Paul Verhoeven's film Hollow Man.
You have no idea what it's like. The power of it, the freedom. I can't let that go. It's amazing what you can do when you don't have to look at yourself in the mirror anymore.
Sebastian Cain from Hollow Man even bears a striking resemblance to Jack Griffin. See? You can barely tell them apart. They're both genius scientists who inject themselves with invisibility for fame and fortune and quickly fall for delusions of grandeur. It doesn't take long for them to start killing their co-workers and tearing things down. The biggest difference between the two characters is how overtly predatory Sebastian is on the women in his life. Before Griffin goes completely mad, he shows us that he still loves his fiancée and wants a better life for her. Sebastian, however, uses his first invisible moments alone to... well, we don't need to see that again. The Invisible Man story endures because mankind's darkest desires have too. For as long as we live in a civilized society, we'll keep seeing interest in stories about people who live outside of it, and the message is always the same.
With great power comes great responsibility.
Wait, no. The message is...
Absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Hollow Man doesn't break any new ground exploring these themes, and just like the movie that inspired it, it relies heavily on spectacle. And that's alright, because even 20 years later, watching a gorilla slowly materialize from the inside out is still mesmerizing. Where Hollow Man falls flat is at the very end. What started as a character study ended as another generic action movie. But despite its minor setbacks and some scenes that could be considered gratuitous, Hollow Man winds up being a great tribute to James Whale's chilling classic. The Invisible Man and horror go hand in hand, but there's another genre of the Invisible Man movie worth talking about for no other reason than how prevalent it is. In the beginning, these movies were about taking over the world and getting revenge on the people that had wronged the titular character. We even saw that to some extent in the war propaganda film Invisible Agent, in which Griffin's cousin is drafted to fight the Nazis. But starting with the release of The Invisible Woman in 1940, the Invisible movies shifted focus from being deep studies on the cruel nature of mankind and started being slapstick comedies. Now, we here at the Lamphouse like The Invisible Woman. It's a fun movie. The characters are just as well developed as any of the supporting cast from the earlier films, the effects are just as great, and it's all in all just a good time. It's a pretty unique story about a fashion model desperate to get noticed. She answers an ad from a kooky scientist eager to try out his new experiment, and the still visible woman, Kitty, becomes the first subject. Soon after, gangsters break in and steal the invisibility device, but the invisible Kitty teaches the baddies a lesson or two, and all's well in the end. In the years that followed The Invisible Woman, things got out of hand. Abbott and Costello met the Invisible Man twice, both Donald Duck and Tom and Jerry had gone invisible, people's kids were getting invisible, mom was invisible, dad was invisible, and invisible men were getting into all sorts of erotic misadventures. The one thing we haven't gotten with these movies is a detailed look at what it's like to be tormented by one of these phantasmagorical villains. That's what makes Leigh Whannell's 2020 adaptation exciting. It's not just a copy of the original, it's a similar story with a new perspective. In this latest adaptation, Griffin is a genius scientist who specializes in optics, like many of the Griffins before. He's also a violently controlling person and takes pleasure in manipulating everyone in his life, including his brother from an early age. That's pretty much everything we ever get to know about the man, because in this movie, the focus shifts from villain to victim. This movie is all about Cecilia Cass. Cecilia has been trapped in a relationship with Griffin, and the film opens with her quite literally escaping from the relationship in the middle of the night. He quickly sneaks back into her life just as she begins to take the first steps towards recovery. He frames exponentially terrible things on Cecilia, which causes her and everyone in her life to start questioning her sanity. This kind of emotional manipulation is called gaslighting, which you may not know was actually popularized by the 1944 film Gaslight. This highlights another clever way that Whannell has shifted focus. In the past, the Invisible Man was fighting for his sanity and slowly losing as he became more and more violent. In Whannell's adaptation, that role is filled by Cecilia. Character development aside, 2020's Invisible Man definitely doesn't disappoint in the special effects department. The brutality in some scenes is jaw-dropping because it's so unexpected. Previous iterations had the character threatening people with a knife or a handgun, but Whannell doesn't shy away at all from following through on those threats, and the results are haunting. Whannell doesn't seem to have struggled at all bringing the Invisible Man into the 21st century, but with his recent addition, it feels like truly every stone has been unturned. From the story's origin with the madman tormenting the powerless, through the invisible predators, to now, with the story turning inside out on itself and offering a welcome new theme. We've been telling different versions of this story for over 100 years, and I think by now it's safe to say we've seen everything that this story has to offer, but undoubtedly, there's more to come.
From what Father said, his mind was, warped.
It must have been warped by imaginary wrongs. A man fighting shadows. He's to be pitied, really. He probed too deeply in forbidden places. What a man earns, he gets. Nature has a strange way of paying him back in his own coin.